Hi, everyone. Hi. Welcome to this 11 o'clock session at SPICY on Attitudes and Alliances, Perspectives on Eliminating Ableism. I'm Joan Ostrov, and I am delighted to be here with my colleagues Kathleen Bogart and Michelle Nario-Redmond to do this session with all of you. We are one of the SPICY sessions this year that's being Facebook Live, so hello to anyone out there on Facebook who might be joining us remotely. We're working on a couple of things related to getting these presentations as maximally available as possible, including figuring out ways to link the slides to the Facebook presentations, and also when they go up on YouTube, when this particular presentation goes up on YouTube, we will not put it up on YouTube until it's captioned, and we're going to just work on access more broadly for thinking about getting our SPICY work in as many different venues as possible, as effectively as possible. And then just thinking about issues related to access and being here together, we welcome you to do whatever you need to do to make this space as accessible and meaningful to you as possible. If you want to walk around, if you want to stand, if you want to leave and come back in, that is all totally fine with us. So that's just another by way of introduction. And Kathleen Bogart from Oregon State University is going to be our first presenter on intervening against ableism using disability models. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Joan for organizing this. It's so exciting to have a symposium on disability and ableism. These sorts of things are not talked about enough, and here we are working to change that. So just as a, there's my thing. Just as a way to set the stage, be sure everyone's on the same page, I'm going to go ahead and give you all a definition of ableism. We'll all be working with these similar ideas in this symposium. So ableism can be defined as stereotyping, prejudice, discrimination, and social oppression towards people with disabilities. And this is a very, closer to the mic. And this is a very significant issue, significant ism, considering that people with disabilities are the largest minority group in the US at about 20% of the population. So today I'll be telling you about 3 studies. If anyone read in detail the abstracts for this symposium, you'll notice that you're getting a bonus study because I only proposed 2. So I may be going a little fast. Let me know if you need any assistance in slowing down or questions or anything like that. My first study will be looking at ableism and disability models among disabled and non-disabled students. The second one will be looking at disability representation in psychology curricula at the undergrad level. And study 3 will be intervening on ableism through disability models and contact by increased representation in psychology education. So we all have underlying assumptions about disability that many of us might not be even aware of, and many of us haven't yet named. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of the major models. So the first model is called the medical model, and this is kind of the default model for most people in Western culture. And so it defines disability as a deficit, a deficiency, a dysfunction, some sort of pathology within the individual. And so this means that it is the problem and the responsibility of the person with the disability, maybe their family members, and an esoteric small group of healthcare providers to deal with. This is not a general problem of the society. So in contrast to that, we have the social model. This is a social constructivist way to think about disability. And this is a model that's espoused by many disability rights activists, disability studies scholars, and this says that society is the primary cause of disability. And the problem lies in society, not in the individual. The responsibility lies in society. So this says that our social and physical architecture are built on the assumption that everyone can walk, hear, see, and think in the same way. So in my first study, we wanted to look at how people's models differed, whether or not they had a disability, and how that might influence attitudes. And we were especially interested in the college student population, not only because I work at a university and in social psychology, we also happen to study a lot of college students, but it is especially important to think about disparities in college for students with disabilities. At the undergrad level, only 11% of students have a disability, so that is a disparity considering 19% of our population has a disability. However, 11% is a pretty substantial minority still in the college system that is being underrepresented. And there's further disparities because of those enrolled, 16%, individuals with disabilities are 16% less likely to get their degree. So one reason why it's important to look at attitudes is that they create a culture of inclusion or exclusion for students with disabilities that will help them either persist or inspire them to leave. So we asked a couple of questions in this study. The first one was, do disabled people have different models than non-disabled people? And we suspected this would be the case because of an old classic theory in social psychology, the actor-observer bias, right? So this says that when an actor is in a situation, they're more likely to attribute their behavior to the environment or the situation, whereas an observer is more likely to attribute someone else's behavior to an internal cause, right? So a simple example of this is, as depicted on my slide here, that many of you may not be able to see, so I'll describe, that you may see someone littering, and you make an attribution, and you say, that person is so inconsiderate. But then, next week, you find yourself dropping a cup on the floor, and you say, well, I'm not inconsiderate, I'm doing it because there are absolutely no trash cans that I can find, right? So you've made a situational attribution for yourself, but an internal attribution for others. So we think this may occur when people think about disability as well, right? The insiders, the disabled people are more likely to see the problems in the situation, whereas outsiders are going to locate the problem within that individual. And the second question we wanted to answer was whether models would affect attitudes. Now, there's been lots of theorizing that these would be related, but this actually hadn't been directly studied yet. So there are a few reasons we think that this might occur. So the medical model may provoke internal attributions about a person's responsibility for a disability. So maybe the person hasn't tried enough in their rehab, or maybe somehow they're to blame for their disability anyway. Whereas thinking about it from the social model view, they reduce blame and reduce that sort of essentialist thinking about impairments being a problem in themselves. So this led us to hypothesize that disabled students would have less ableist and medical model beliefs and stronger social model beliefs than non-disabled students. And model beliefs would mediate differences in ableism between disabled and non-disabled students. And so in this study, we collected a convenient sample from basically all students in a required undergraduate class at my university. So we ended up with about 1,800 participants and 215 of them had a disability. And so we collected survey measures of ableism. For this, we used the Attitudes Towards Disability scale, or Disabled Person scale. And this is one of the oldest and most widely used scales. You can talk to me later about my opinions about ways to measure attitudes. It's really hard to find like the perfect measure. And we also use scales by Rosalind Darling to measure social and medical model beliefs. And so, just to orient you to the graph that you may or may not be able to see, that I will also describe. So the gray bars are non-disabled students, and the orange bars are disabled students. And the non-disabled students, as we predicted, had higher ableism, had lower social model beliefs, and higher medical model beliefs. Now, we also conducted a mediation in which we examined whether medical and social model could explain some of the differences between disability status and ableist beliefs. And we found that both higher medical model beliefs among non-disabled people and higher social model beliefs among non-disabled people led to these disparities in ableism. So to conclude this study, we found that students with disabilities are less ableist, they hold stronger social model beliefs and weaker medical model beliefs than those without disabilities. And medical and social model beliefs mediated the differences in ableism between students with and without disabilities. So an implication for this could be that students with disabilities might experience a cultural mismatch regarding disability models and attitudes in higher education. So increasing disability representation in higher education from a social model perspective may improve education outcomes for this group. So in the next study, we actually explicitly measured the level of representation of disability in psychology higher ed. So as a sampling frame, we used the U.S. News and World Report's list of the top 100 schools. Only 98 of them had psychology departments, so we looked at 98 universities. And we conducted a content analysis of the course catalog descriptions for every psychology course that was offered at each of those universities. And we looked at whether any of the courses described disability or a synonym or a related theme, as well as the extent to which those things were described from a medical or a social model. So we found, unsurprisingly, that 100% of our universities that we looked at covered psychiatric disabilities. I would be very confused if our top psychology departments were not talking about things like mental health, right? But concerning to me was that more common disabilities, such as actually the most common disabilities according to the census are chronic health conditions and physical disabilities. But as you can see, those are much less likely to be represented in these universities. So the chronic disabilities were only represented at 34%, and physical only at 8%. And we also found that when they were discussed, disability was discussed significantly more from a medical model than from a social model. So, we concluded that disability topics are underrepresented in psychology undergrad curricula, and when they are covered, it's more from the medical model. So, the final study involves trying to intervene on this problem. So we examined 3 different existing courses at my university, and I will give you some foreshadowing about a limitation right off the bat, which is of these 3 classes that we compared, I taught 2 of them. And that is because there's no one else on my campus in my department who has a disability. So we compared classes that included education about disability content from a social model perspective. This was my psychology of disability class, and I am a disabled instructor, and I acknowledge my disability in that class. Another class that we compared was the class we called Contact. This was a class that didn't have disability content. I taught it, I acknowledged my disability. And then the control class is a class taught by a different instructor who did not have a disability and didn't include disability content. So to tell you a little bit more about the content of the Education plus Contact group, the Psychology of Disability class included topics on the definitions and models behind disability, so a lot of what we've already talked about here. And although we talked about the medical model, we really spent a lot of time challenging it and thinking about things from a social model perspective. We talked about ableism, we talked about disability identity and pride, we talked about relationships and sexuality, and many other things. And the textbook that I used was The Social Psychology of Disability by Dana Dunn. And so we had 3 hypotheses. The first was that medical model beliefs would be positively correlated with ableism, while social model beliefs would be negatively correlated with ableism. And that education and contact would show a reduction in ableism and medical model beliefs, and an increase in social model beliefs compared to the contact or control classes. And that the change in model beliefs would mediate the change in ableism between those classes. So as you'll see, our 3 groups had approximately 50 participants in each. And we used the same measures that I described in the first study, so the attitudes towards disabled person scale and the medical and social model scales. And we administered those at the beginning of the term and then at the end of the 10-week term. So to address hypothesis 1 first, it was supported, and this continues to replicate the finding that we talked about in study 1, that medical model beliefs are associated with greater ableism and social model beliefs are associated with lower ableism. So let's move on to the class differences here. So again, I'll orient you to the graph if you're able to see it. The orange graph is the education plus contact group. The light gray group is the contact, and the dark gray bar is the control group. And these means that are shown control for baseline levels of ableism. And so this shows that individuals in the education and contact group had the lowest ableism, controlling for baseline, compared to the other 2 groups. And finally, our mediation model also supported our hypotheses. So we can see that, those of you who can see the screen here, when we're making a comparison between education plus contact and contact, that medical model has a significant indirect effect towards ableism, showing that individuals in the education and contact group had lower medical model and lower ableism compared to those in the contact group. Now, if we look at the second comparison between education and contact and control, we find the same pattern, that there's a significant indirect effect of medical model such that those in the education and contact group had lower medical model, which led to lower ableism. Again, all of these findings are controlling for baseline beliefs. Interestingly, social model did not serve as a significant indirect effect on any of these changes. And I'll tell you about that in the next slide. Backwards. Here we go. So, in other words, participants in the education and contact class showed a reduction in ableism and medical model beliefs and an increase in social model beliefs compared to those in the contact or control classes. And indeed, the reduction in medical model mediated improvements in ableism in the education and contact class compared to the other classes. Now, what's going on with the lack of indirect effect of social model? We think what may be going on is a combination of challenges in measuring social model, given that there's only one existing scale. And the more substantial reason we think that might be happening is that a lot of this education and contact class involved challenging the medical model. So we think that challenging this very dominant, ingrained in our culture way of thinking was quite effective. Even if we didn't see measurable change in social model beliefs, we saw reductions in that essentialist medical model belief type of thinking. So to summarize all of these studies, I just want to highlight that increasing social model representation of disability in higher ed can benefit a lot of people. We'll start with non-disabled undergrads and say that this will obviously potentially help reduce ableism. It will bring their attitudes and models into alignment with disabled people's views, and this will help begin the process of creating allyship, which my colleagues here are going to be talking about. Now, for disabled undergrads, obviously they stand to benefit a lot. They may engage in reduced internalized ableism. They may feel more willing to disclose, and with disclosure comes destigmatization and finding of peers who share your identity. And they also may be more comfortable requesting accommodations, and we know that there's a direct and strong finding showing that if you are willing to request your accommodations, you will have better educational outcomes. So I want to throw in a couple of semi-related plugs here at the end of my talk. The first one is that if any of you in this room or on Facebook Live are interested in increasing social model representation of disability in your coursework, whether or not you have much experience teaching about disability, we have just put out a resource through the Society for Teaching of Psychology that you can download for free. You can follow this link, or you can email me for a more convenient way to access a link. And this resource contains modules that represent every common topic in an introductory psychology class. Each one has videos and readings and sometimes PowerPoints that you can pull from. So if this is something you're interested in doing but maybe don't have a lot of experience in talking about disability, this could be a way to start. If you're already really invested in talking about disability, maybe you'll find some more just some fun, interesting activities in there as well. And then the last plug is that we have an issue of the Journal of Social Issues, which of course is a SPICY journal, coming out on ableism in September 2019. And actually, all of the presenters in this symposium today have articles in it, and it speaks to the productivity and burgeoning aspects of ableism, that the things that they're talking about today are different from the things that will appear in this issue. So there's a whole lot of ableism research research going on, and you can find it in a lot of different places. So definitely keep your eye out for this. And I just want to thank all of my collaborators. And are we taking questions now, or
We'll wait till the end.
we're going to wait until the end for questions? So I will pass them along to Joan.